Office 365 service interruptions. Hey everyone, Ben Finkel here, and in this nugget, we're going to take a look at a couple of different ways to deal with service interruptions that occur with our Office 365 tenant. Specifically, we want to talk both about the service request utility that's built into the Office admin portal and the remote connectivity analyzer tool that Microsoft offers online. Identifying and dealing with service interruptions in Office 365 is relatively straightforward, but if it's your first time doing it, if you're new to Office 365, you can be scratching your head a little bit because, of course, Office 365 is not in your environment. You don't really have access to direct diagnostic tools. You've got to rely on Microsoft to tell you what's going on. Now, the number one tool that you're going to use when you have service interruptions is going to be on the Office admin portal here. Right on the left, we've got a support pull down. And when you select support, it's going to launch the support page, which allows you to create service requests. First of all, notice that it gives me this nice handy summary of the current service or Office 365 health status, right? So I can say, oh, you know what? My users are reporting problems with Exchange. I can see that Exchange is actually having an issue right now. It's yellow instead of green. So I know maybe I don't need to put in a service request for an Exchange issue. I can see, oh, it's an extended recovery and they are currently working on fixing it and getting it fixed, and I can relay that information to my users. But if I do need a service request, over here on the left-hand side, you see a number of different categories of service requests that I can create. Billing problems, mail problems, sites and document sharing. Now, in order to create a service request, you do need to be a member of one of the administrator roles. If you recall from our nugget on administrator roles, every administrator role can create service requests with the exception of the product-specific administrators. So that means SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, and Skype for Business administrators cannot by default create service requests, although typically you take those administrators and you also make them a member of the service admin role so that they can get that service request feature added onto their responsibilities. If you're not in one of those admin roles, you can't create service requests, so that's important to keep in mind. Once you're here, in order to create the service request, you just identify which category is appropriate for the problem that you're dealing with. Let's say we're having a mail issue, ignoring the fact that it says Exchange is having mail issues right now. And you can see even now it says, hey, we're investigating a problem that may be related. So it's like, are you sure you really want to create an issue? Is this really a problem, or is it, related to what we're doing? And you can cancel your request right away. But if you want to continue, you simply pull down what features you're having a problem with, what your symptom is, and you can give an issue summary and issue details. It will try to recommend some support articles to you that might in fact solve your problem for you before you get there. If none of those help, you say yes, continue. You can provide even more details on this page. Is your service unavailable? Is not available? How many users are affected? All of these different things. You can indicate for this particular service request, because it's a mail one, you can indicate specific email address of someone who is affected by the issue. That's so they can look it up on their end. And then the last step would be to confirm your details and submit it. And I'm not obviously going to do that because I'm not currently having an issue. I'm just demonstrating how this interface works. So that's how you would create a service request in the system. And then you can monitor service requests right here beneath that with the service request tab. So here I would be able to see the title, the status, who was opened, and when the last time a service request was modified. So you can monitor all of your service requests right here in the portal as well. Again, in order to create or monitor those service requests, you have to be a member of an admin role. A couple of diagnostic tools that Microsoft recommends that you are familiar with and you recognize. Number one, the remote connectivity analyzer at testconnectivity.microsoft.com. If you can bring this up, this is a really awesome tool. And what this is going to do is this is going to connect or attempt to connect to your Office 365 tenant from a remote Microsoft server. So that will effectively test remote connections to your Office 365 tenant. And you can see down here as we scroll down, there are a lot of different tests. Each of these tabs offers a different collection of tests. So you can run Exchange server tests to see if you're going to be sending and receiving emails appropriately. You can run Skype for Business tests to make sure that you have appropriate Skype for Business connectivity and bandwidth coming in. General Office 365 tests. For instance, let's say we want to run an Office 365 single sign-on test. You just select that, click the next button down here in the lower right, and it says, okay, who do you want to test? I'll test user 1 at cbtoffice.com. If you watched my nuggets on setting up ADFS and WAP, you know that I have single sign-on enabled for cbtoffice.com, and I can test to see if that's working here by simply providing these user details. I'm going to test Azure Active Directory. That's correct. I need to indicate my verification down here. Now, one of the things that I happen to know before I run this is that I turned off my Azure Active Directory, my local Azure Active Directory environment that was operating as the authentication for this single sign-on. So this should actually come back with an error indicating that it could not work. When I click perform test, you see down here it's performing the test, and that little icon is spinning, and in a few minutes it's going to tell me whether or not single sign-on is working for user test user1 at cbtoffice.com. Again, I really expect it to fail. And in fact, it did fail. Connectivity test failed. If I scroll down here, I get all the details of exactly what went on. So I can click additional details to see what the errors were, what the problem was. I can click test steps right here. This is great. It's going to tell me with green check marks all the steps that passed, and then the one that failed, testing TCP port 443 on adfs.cbtoffice.com. So that is my public WAP server, adfs.cbtoffice.com. It was not listening on 443. Why not? Because I shut it down. I don't have it actually running anymore. It was unable to connect to my WAP server. So now I could go and figure out what the problem was there and know how to resolve it. So the remote connectivity analyzer, really awesome. So just looking at a couple of important tests that you can run here. We just went over the single sign-on test. You've also got your DNS connection test. That's going to make sure that your DNS records are set up appropriately for Exchange and for Link. Your internet email test, they're going to make sure that you can receive inbound email as well as you can send outbound email from your Exchange server. The free busy test, that's called the hybrid free busy test. That's going to ensure that in a hybrid online and on-premise Exchange environment, people's free busy calendars are being synchronized appropriately. So that's something that if you're running a hybrid Exchange online and on-premise environment, you may very well want to know about that test. There's also a client tab here with a number of different tools and utilities that you can use to run like it sounds from your internal client. These are tools that you would run from your desktop. And primarily, I think the health and readiness check that we covered in our nugget on planning a pilot for Office 365 has supplanted these tools, but you still do have links to them here. You can download and run them, in particular the Microsoft Connectivity Analyzer tool, which is going to identify common connectivity issues for Outlook, Skype for Business, and Office 365. So be familiar with these tools, or at least be aware of their existence, particularly for the exam. You may be asked a question about how you could run a test or a diagnostic from your internal client as opposed to an external public internet. So that concludes this nugget on dealing with service interruptions with your Office 365 tenant. Just to recap, when there is genuinely a service interruption, you're having a problem with the service, Microsoft is in charge of that. So the number one way that you're going to deal with it is to create a service request inside of the admin portal. You need to be a member of one of the admin roles in order to create and monitor service requests, and you can create very specific service requests based on the type of problem that you're having and then monitor them with the service request panel inside of that portal. You can also use the Microsoft Remote Connectivity Analyzer tool to ensure that connectivity to your Microsoft Office 365 tenant is set up properly, and that's going to include things like MX records, DNS records, single sign-on connectivity, and even some different client tools that you can download and run locally in order to test from your internal network as opposed to the wider public internet. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.